Okay, so you know how sometimes you just want to cut through all the noise, especially around stuff like meditation, spirituality.
Hmm.
You're
I,
curious, right? You
mm,
want to get what it's about, maybe how it fits into your life, but without, needing a PhD or getting totally overwhelmed.
Absolutely. And you've sent over some really interesting sources for this deep dive.
Yeah, a real mix. Everything from a Healthline article breaking down meditation types, pretty practical stuff,
Hmm.
to, well, some more academic papers looking at secular spirituality, even religious experiences. It's quite a range.
It is. And I think what's fascinating looking at these together is how these concepts, meditation, spirituality, religion, they get talked about together a lot, but they each have their own distinct feel.
Right, but they overlap too, don't they?
Oh, definitely. Some surprising overlaps, actually. So our goal here, I think, is to unpack all that. Pull out the useful bits, the insights that listeners can actually use to navigate this stuff for themselves. Make it make sense for their own well-being, their own understanding.
Perfect. Okay, so where do we start? Maybe meditation. That Healthline piece seemed like a good, clear entry point.
Yeah, sounds good. So Healthline defines it as essentially a technique, something to help you develop awareness of the present moment.
Sharpen focus, connect with your body, your breath, even accept difficult emotions, it said.
Exactly. And it even mentioned altering consciousness, which is interesting. It's ancient, practiced globally for, well, peace and calm.
Which, let's be honest, we could all probably use a bit more of.
Couldn't we just?
Yeah.
And, the key thing isn't necessarily trying to achieve some perfectly blank mind, which feels impossible sometimes,
But
right?
really,
It's more about cultivating a different relationship with your thoughts, your experiences. And the fact it's found everywhere across so many cultures, that really says something about maybe a fundamental human need for that inner quiet.
and the benefits they list. Wow. It's pretty impressive.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, like physically lower blood pressure, better sleep, and then psychologically reduce stress, better emotional regulation, more focus, even improved mood. It almost sounds, I don't know, too good to be true.
Yeah, yeah, it does sound like a magic bullet when you list it like that. But I think the key is that it's usually the regular practice that builds up over time.
Right, cumulative effect.
Exactly. Like, think of it as gentle exercise for the mind. You're
Mm.
sort of strengthening your ability to handle stress, navigate emotions bit by bit.
And it gets really specific too. The article mentioned potential help for things like depression, anxiety,
Hmm.
cardiovascular disease, even dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, insomnia, ADHD, chronic pain. That's a huge range.
It's a very wide net, yeah. And of course, it's crucial to remember meditation is often more of a supportive tool, right? Not usually a standalone cure for these things.
Good point.
But it definitely raises interesting questions about how mindfulness practices could be, integrated more into overall health and well-being strategies.
So, for anyone listening thinking, okay, sounds interesting, but how do I even start? The sources actually have some good practical advice. Like Mira Desia's point about finding something that feels comfortable.
Yes, and encouraging.
Yeah, something you'll actually do. It's about being gentle, regular, not forcing it. No pretzel poses required unless you want them.
That is so important. People get discouraged so easily, thinking they're doing it wrong if their mind wanders or they don't feel instantly zen.
Guilty.
Huh. We all are, probably. But Desi's advice is great. It's about the process, showing up, being kind to yourself in that process. Makes it way more sustainable.
And then Padram Shojai suggested that consistent 20 minutes a day.
Right, with maybe shorter top-ups.
Yeah, like little resets during a crazy day. He shared that great Zen proverb too. You should meditate for 20 minutes every day unless you're too busy. Then you should sit for an hour.
Huh. I love that one. It's funny, but it really hits home, doesn't it?
It does make you think.
When we feel most frantic, most like we have no time, that's probably when we need that little bit of space the most, just to recenter.
And thankfully, for us modern folk, Healthline points out there are tons of online options. You don't need a mountaintop monastery.
Not anymore. The accessibility now is amazing. Guided sessions, timers, specific techniques,
Yeah.
whatever you need, it's probably out there online somewhere. Lowers that barrier to entry significantly.
Okay, good foundation on the what and why of meditation, but what about the how? It's not just one thing, right? Healthline broke down several types.
Yeah, quite a few. Mindfulness is probably the most well-known now.
Right, roots in Buddhism, super popular. Observing thoughts, no judgment. It's a mix of concentration, maybe on the breath, and just a Awareness. Sounds good for practicing solo.
Definitely. It's often the gateway for many people. The key idea is training yourself to be like the calm observer of your own mental weather, less reactivity.
Creating a bit of distance so you're not swept away.
Precisely.
Then there's spiritual meditation. Healthline says this pops up in most religions.
Uh-huh. Very diverse.
More about connecting to deeper meaning, maybe a higher power. They mention Christian contemplative prayer, Sufi Dukkha, Jewish Kabbalah.
Yeah. Lots of examples.
You can do it at home, place of worship, focused on spiritual growth.
And this really shows that clear link. We mentioned how meditation is often woven right into spiritual or religious practice. The variety across faiths is fascinating, all aiming for that connection to something bigger.
Okay, what else? Focus meditation. Sounds straightforward. Concentrate on one of the senses.
Yep. Simple but effective for anchoring the mind.
And movement meditation, like walking, gardening, yoga, tai chi.
Ah, yes, for those of us who find it hard to sit still.
Me, it's about connecting with your body, the present moment, through activity, finding peace in action.
Exactly. It busts that myth that mindfulness requires total stillness. Engaging the body can be a really powerful anchor for some people.
Mantra meditation, using a repeated sound, word, phrase. Is the classic example.
Right. The repetition helps clear the mind, quiets the chatter.
You can say it aloud or silently. Supposedly leads to alertness and deeper awareness. Good if silence feels loud.
Huh. Yes. For those who dislike silence, the mantra gives the mind a specific, neutral thing to hold on to.
Transcendental meditation, TM, gotta mention, apparently studied a lot scientifically, but no details on the how in this piece.
Yeah, TM is its own specific technique, often taught in a structured way. Well-known, lots of research around it.
Progressive relaxation, tensing and releasing muscle groups, imagining a wave of relaxation. Sounds nice.
Very physical, very tangible. Great for stress relief, especially before bed. It really taps into that mind-body link work with the physical tension to calm the mental state.
Loving kindness meditation, focusing on compassion, acceptance for yourself and others, sending out well wishes.
This one can be really powerful, especially if you're dealing with anger or resentment. Actively cultivating warmth and goodwill can genuinely shift your emotional baseline over time. More empathy, more connection.
Sounds like something the world needs more of.
How's it just?
And lastly, visualization. Using your imagination, creating positive scenes, using all your senses, maybe even embodying qualities of someone you admire.
Yeah, tapping into the power of imagination to evoke feelings of calm, peace, or strength. Making the mental image vivid makes it more impactful.
Okay, wow. So that's a lot of different flavors of meditation. Let's shift gears a bit now to spirituality.
Okay.
The Chronicon article and that Reddit discussion too, they both really emphasize how spirituality is often seen as separate from organized religion nowadays.
Yes, that distinction comes up a lot. The Chronicon piece defines spirituality as this intrinsic human thing, a desire for meaning, connection, self-transcendence.
Self-transcendent.
Yeah, that feeling of being connected to something larger than just your individual self.
Gotcha. And the Reddit thread put it in really simple terms, didn't it? Contrasting spirituality, more individual, inner growth, big questions, flexible, inclusive.
Right. Versus religion, often more organized, community-based, specific doctrines, rituals, maybe more rigid or exclusive sometimes.
It really captures how many people seem to experience it, or at least talk about it, today. Spirituality as a personal journey, religion as more of a shared framework.
Exactly. And the Chronicon article even brought up secular spirituality.
Right. The idea that you can explore that spiritual dimension, that need for meaning, without necessarily believing in anything supernatural.
Which is a fascinating idea. It suggests that maybe that need for purpose, connection, awe. It can be met through nature, art, relationships, ethics, not just traditional religious belief.
And spirituality seems to dive headfirst into those huge existential questions, doesn't it? Who am I? What's life for? Why do we suffer?
Absolutely. The Chronicon mentioned various psychological theories, Jungian, existential, transpersonal, humanistic, that all kind of support this view of spirituality or the search for meaning as a fundamental human dimension.
So it's deeply embedded in the human psyche, this search.
It seems so. That drive to understand our existence, find our place. It's at the heart of many spiritual paths, whether they're religious or not.
Okay, but they do intersect, right? Spirituality and religion, they're not totally separate realms.
No, definitely not. As the Chronicon said, they overlap, even if they're distinct concepts. And remember, Healthline.
Yeah.
It specifically said spiritual traditions often incorporate meditation.
Ah, right. So that spiritual meditation type we talked about earlier is a prime example of that intersection.
Precisely. Focusing on connecting with something beyond the everyday aligns perfectly with the goals of many religions. It's a practice within a tradition.
The research on whether being religious or spiritual is actually good for your mental well-being, the Chronicon suggested it's kind of mixed.
Yeah, that's a really complex area. The article noted some studies find negative effects, or no effect at all.
But
That,
others show benefits.
right. Especially when faith is used as a coping mechanism during difficult times. Things like lower anxiety, depression, maybe greater self-esteem, resilience, even better physical health outcomes in some cases.
So it really depends.
It really seems to. It likely hinges on so many factors. The individual's relationship with their faith, the nature of the religious community, how they integrate beliefs into coping with life's challenges. It's not a simple yes or no. The how seems crucial.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's move into this concept of religious experience. The Wikipedia source you shared dug into this.
Right, a subjective experience interpreted within a religious framework. Apparently, the term itself really gained traction in the 19th century.
Why then?
Well, it was a time of increasing rationalism, scientific thinking, particularly in the West. So focusing on personal, subjective experience became a way to validate faith, maybe counteracting a purely rational or dogmatic approach. It shifted the authority somewhat to the individual's encounter with the divine.
Interesting. And William James, he seems key here. His 4 characteristics of mystical experience. Transient, ineffable, noetic, passive. Can you unpack those a bit?
Sure. Transient just means it's temporary. It doesn't last forever. Ineffable means it's incredibly hard, maybe impossible, to describe in words, like trying to explain color to someone born blind.
Got it.
Noetic means it feels like you've gained some profound insight or knowledge, a deep understanding.
Like a download of wisdom.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
And passive means it often feels like it's happening to you, not something you actively caused or controlled.
Okay, that helps. Then there's Rudolf Otto, and the numinous sounds intense.
It is a bit more intense, yeah. He talked about 2 aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Mysterium tremendum, that sense of awe, maybe even fear or trembling in the face of something immense and powerful.
Whoa.
And Mysterium fascinans, the flip side, that compelling draw, fascination, attraction towards it. Otto saw this encounter with the holy other as the core of religious experience, very personal communion.
Wow, okay. And Norman Habel, he defined it as a structured engagement with the sacred within a tradition.
Right. Hebel emphasized context. An unusual feeling isn't automatically religious unless it's understood and given meaning through the lens of a specific belief system, its rituals, its stories. He distinguished it from, say, psychopathology or drug effects because of that interpretive framework.
That makes sense. The interpretation matters. Wikipedia also mentioned immediate versus mediated experiences.
Yeah, more in Hebel again. Immediate is that direct, personal encounter. No intermediary. Mediated is experiencing the sacred through something, rituals, scripture, a sacred place, a person, nature.
So different pathways to that connection.
Exactly. Both potentially valid forms of religious experience within a tradition.
And briefly, Richard Swinburne. 5 categories, principles of credulity and testimony, basically arguing we should trust experiences unless there's a reason not to.
Yeah, Swinburne offered a philosophical argument for taking these subjective accounts seriously. It's debated, of course, but it pushes back against dismissing them out of hand just because they're subjective.
The article linked spiritual awakening, too, possibly as a religious experience with lasting effects, mentioned AA's 12th step, even Pope Francis connecting true religious experience to caring for others.
Right, showing the diverse forms and potential consequences, personal transformation, recovery, ethical action, compassion.
And it touched on Christian mysticism aspiring to truth via emulating Christ, those stages like purgative, illuminative, unitive, and Sufism experiencing closeness to God in this life.
These are just glimpses into how different traditions conceptualize that path towards deeper, direct experience of the divine or ultimate reality within their own frameworks.
And finally, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan's view of Hinduism, reason and intuition combined, meant to be experienced, but noting that this emphasis on experience is relatively modern in Hinduism, maybe influenced by the West.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about historical influence and the cross-pollination of ideas. The very concept of religious experience as a central theme has evolved even in Eastern traditions.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Now, shifting focus slightly, but still related, that Italian study on spirituality and coping with loss during COVID-19, that felt really grounded and, sadly, very relevant.
It really did. It offered some powerful insights into how spiritual beliefs can be a resource, a real source of strength during incredibly traumatic times.
What were the key findings?
Well, it found that spirituality was a protective factor for many in processing grief, especially the belief that the deceased person still exists somehow in another dimension or form.
That makes sense. It offers comfort, a sense of continued connection.
Exactly. And the study really highlighted the importance of funeral rites for healthy grieving, especially early on.
Which was so disrupted during the pandemic.
Massively disrupted. And that lack of ritual, that inability to gather and mourn collectively, it really hindered the grieving process for many, made closure much harder to find.
The study mentioned that people who felt abandoned by God had a particularly difficult time. It's a heavy point. When core beliefs feel shattered by trauma, it adds another layer of pain, of spiritual crisis, to the grief itself. Highlights how vital supportive spiritual community can be.
But it also found that performing rituals, even much later, could help restore some social closeness.
Yes, even belatedly, those shared actions of remembrance and mourning seem to help people reconnect and heal together.
And just the sheer awfulness of not being able to say goodbye or see the body, leading to disbelief, difficulty adjusting, utterly understandable.
It really drove home the psychological need for those tangible farewells, for acknowledging the reality of the loss.
Okay, you also shared a study on spontaneous spiritual awakenings, or SSAs,
Right.
from Frontiers.
Right. This one used questionnaires, things like the MEQ30, 11DAC, NETI, KAS, quite technical tools, basically, to try and map out the phenomenology. What did these experiences actually feel like?
And what did they find? What are some common features?
Well, looking at the NETI results they mentioned, common themes included things like a really strong interest in seeing reality or truth.
Feelings of deep gratitude, curiosity, profound love, or appreciation. A sense of understanding that there's no ultimate separation between things.
Yeah.
And interestingly, a reduction in self-centeredness afterwards.
That sounds like a major shift in perspective. Did they compare it to anything?
Yeah, they compared the altered states reported during SSAs to other non-drug altered states, like from being in a dark room, a flotation tank, holotropic breathwork, Gansfeld experiments.
Right.
They found similarities suggesting that maybe, while the trigger is different, spontaneous versus induced, there might be some shared subjective territory, perhaps even common neural correlates in these non-ordinary states.
Fascinating. Okay, last big area, that new Spotlight magazine piece comparing Eastern and Western viewpoints. Greece versus India, intellectualism versus spiritualism.
Yeah, a broad comparison, but with some interesting points. It contrasted Greek philosophy's intellectual clarity, as Sri Aurobindo put it, with the Eastern, particularly Indian, focus on sincerity in spiritual pursuit.
And how philosophy and religion are maybe more intertwined in the East, less separate than in the West, historically.
Exactly. The article suggested that organic link in the East versus a less intimate, sometimes even adversarial, relationship in the West between philosophy and religion.
It also talked about the East emphasizing the truth of the spirit, while the West focused more on the truth of life, saying both could be one-sided.
Right. That potential imbalance may be overemphasizing the inner at the expense of the outer, or vice versa, suggesting a need for a more holistic view.
But it also suggested a convergence happening now. The West getting more interested in the inner world, the East appreciating outer progress more.
Yes, a sense of mutual learning, maybe recognizing the limits of each traditional focus and becoming more open to integrating the other perspective.
It even mentioned Victor Cousin, a Western philosopher, admiring the depth he found in Eastern thought, especially Indian philosophy.
Yeah, a significant nod from a Western thinker, acknowledging that profound wisdom.
And this all circled back to Sri Aurobindo again, didn't it? His idea of integrating the idealist, the Eastern tendency perhaps, with the pragmatist, the Western one, bringing together Purusha and Prakriti within ourselves.
Exactly. Aurobindo's vision of combining that inner spiritual focus with active, engaged life in the world. It's a powerful model for wholeness, suggesting true growth lies in blending these, not choosing one over the other.
Yeah.
Neither pure inwardness nor pure outwardness holds the full picture.
And the article concluded, sort of, that spiritual unity comes after psychological unity by connecting spirit and life within us, finding that common ground inside.
Precisely. Bridging that gap, integrating inner and outer, leading to a more unified sense of self and a more harmonious way of being in the world.
Wow. Okay, so we have covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've seen meditation isn't just one thing, but a whole range of practices with some pretty compelling potential benefits. We have explored spirituality as that personal search for meaning, often distinct from, but sometimes overlapping with, organized religion.
Right, that individual quest.
And we took a really interesting look at religious experience, what it means, how it's understood, the history of the idea itself.
And remembering Miradesi's advice seems key here, finding what actually resonates with you, whether it's a specific meditation technique or how you explore your own spirituality.
It's personal.
It's about experimenting, seeing what feels right, what's beneficial for you.
Exactly.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners to sort of mull over, considering everything we've touched on, especially those Eastern and Western perspectives.
Hmm.
How might consciously trying to integrate both your inner spiritual focus and your outer engaged life, how might that contribute to a more complete sense of well-being and understanding, specifically for you?
That's a great question to ponder.
Yeah, maybe something to reflect on. Thinking about the different meditation types, the nuances of spirituality, religion, experience, it's all part of that ongoing journey, isn't it? Exploring ourselves and our place in the world.